All right. So my name is Tyler Shoemaker, and I am a postdoc with the UC Davis DataLab. This workshop is held under the auspices of the DataLab. DataLab is a program funded by the UC Davis Provost and supported by the UC Davis Library to facilitate the application of data science methods, technologies, and best practices to enhance research and learning in all domains across our university. We provide at DataLab research services, including office hours and project support, host and teach training events like this one, and facilitate community efforts to build and grow capacity in the data sciences. Much of what we're going to be doing today is kind of ground level work about how you use a computer in order to do data science. Those are the kinds of conversations we have at DataLab, as well as more higher level questions and inquiries into method, into how to acquire data sets and all of that. So today's workshop is offered by DataLab in conjunction with a wide array of workshops that are kind of under the broader heading of the UC Love Data Week. We'll post a link in the chat for you to check out other training opportunities that are happening at Davis and across the UCs this week in just a moment here. All right. So there is good introductory work. I am going to share my screen and I'll be working from screen share for the majority of the discussion today. But I would also encourage you to follow along. So to not leave Zoom in an entirely full screen, but rather kind of situate it in a way where you can be working with your computer as you're going along. So I will share now. And I'm just going to share really briefly my web browser to show you quickly an outline of what we'll be talking about today. So there are all of 3 slides on this, this outline, one of which is our title. The second is just simply what we'll be doing. The workshop is slated to be about 2 hours. I think there will be maybe an hour and a quarter, hour and a half of kind of guided walkthrough, and then after which we'll open that out to an exercise that we can do together, that you can do on your own. We're going to just kind of hang around and be there for Q&A and for working through a little sort of puzzle exercise at the end. So we'll start with an introduction to the command line. And once we have familiarized ourselves with using the command line, we'll move on to using a text editor on the command line and going from there. After that, then we'll do our exercise, okay? There are a few links that will also drop in chat really briefly here. They are to a course reader that will circulate now and then also to afterwards. And that has just a kind of more formal write-up and walkthrough of the material that I'll be covering today, as well then on this particular repo that I've made for the workshop, there's the little exercise folder. So I'm just going to go ahead and show you briefly. This is what the reader looks like. It's kind of broken off into a few sections. And I'm going to go ahead and copy into chat right now this link. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to stop sharing briefly for a moment and then get onto my desktop so that we can walk through. Oh, Carl already posted the link. Wonderful. Thanks, Carl. All right. So we can all see my desktop. Good on that. Perfect. All right. So today we're going to be working on a kind of different plane of representation, we could say, in your computer. The computing environment is sort of built up in a number of levels, starting from the kind of very lowest bit representations of ones and zeros. That's the kind of common parlance that you hear all the time. A computer just runs with ones and zeros or something, and running up sort of step by step up through a number of different abstractions to get us to something that we can actually read on screen and play around with and move with images or use a cursor or something like that. The command line is just another representation on our computing environment, and it's a sort of step away from the one that you see just in front of you. This, what we would call now, is a graphical user interface. It's built of a number of windowing systems and folders that we can interact with most typically with a mouse, right? So I can open up, for example, a Finder window down here, and I can move this around, right? I have a lot of extensibility and a lot of malleability with where I can move something on my desktop or in my sort of file system, can make this bigger, I can drag it, I can zoom in and all of that, right? That's wonderful, and that's really useful. Software companies and software and computer developers and manufacturers really push using a computer in this way because it's rather intuitive, it's pretty easy to get going on it, and they can make it a proprietary system, right? So Apple or Microsoft uses as a selling point the particular way of interacting with your computer as something that's very brand specific, right? So they have die-hard Apple users, die-hard PC users. Sometimes these conversations really just come down to whether or not people prefer to look at their computer in one form or another, right? So that's one kind of environment that we often use our computers in. The key to remember, though, for this environment and for using your computer in this way is that it's effectively just a metaphor, right? The metaphor that we're seeing on screen right now, it really has two components. It has a desktop, which we can see here, right? There's no actual desktop in front of you. This is just kind of a planar space that I can put files onto, put in quotes here. And then we have a Finder window, right? So the window as a kind of metaphor itself for how we interact with computers. We can think and reflect a little bit more on, what it means to work with these metaphors. A window is something that you see through, a desktop is something that you put something on. And those kinds of metaphoric implications control how users work with their computers, right? It makes it very intuitive on the one hand to use a system like this, but it also comes with certain rules about what you can and can't do with your computer when you interact with it in this way, right? So the command line gives us another way to interact with the whole structure of our computers, and to do so in a way that doesn't quite use the metaphors of, say, the desktop or of the windowing system, right? So that's the kind of conceptual overarching frame for the workshop today. And I start with this because I think a lot of times the command line can be particularly intimidating, especially if you've never used it before. It sort of signifies I'm doing real kind of computer work right now. And there's a lot of baggage around what ultimately ends up being something that's just a couple lines of text that you use to navigate around your computer. So that's very strange, and it's worth thinking about a little bit further why it is that so much kind of hesitancy or anxiety accumulates around using a computer a little bit differently than what we're used to. But what I really want to emphasize today is just simply that it's another metaphor. It's another way of representing what your computer structure is and what it looks like, and then how you interact with it. So if you take nothing else away from the workshop today, I hope that it sort of at least ameliorates or mollifies some of those kind of weird hesitancies that I think are built into interacting on the command line or interacting with our computers in a slightly different way, right? So here we are. Let's get in then to this different representation of our computer. If you're on a Mac, that's where I am, and I'll be getting to the terminal window of the command line from there. PC users have a slightly different route that is outlined in the course reader. So please reference that if you are on one of those machines. Although you should have also done a little bit of sort of preemptory work if you're a PC user, to install some specific software to help you follow along for today. So that's the kind of big disclaimer. Make sure that you have that installed. If you don't, or if you had trouble with that, flag in the chat and Carl can help you a little bit, but we will have to move on and over through the material today just so that we can cover everything. So again, if you're on PC, you can follow with the course reader. If you're on a Mac, you can just simply open up a Finder window. Regardless, it's all going to take you to the same black box of the command line. So on Mac, what I do to get to the command line, a couple of different ways. I just go to Applications, and you can see here, we've got a whole list of them. And the application that Mac users use to access the command line lives in a little subfolder called Utilities. And that's right here. So we just go into Utilities, and we go and down into the terminal. So if I click this, you'll see here that it opens up a screen. Yours might look a little bit different depending on how you've configured it or if you've configured it, but all the same, you should see a little bit of a little window that has popped up somehow. So again, that's just under Applications. It might look a little bit different, but Utilities and then Terminal. Right? Terminal is itself an application. PC users, we had you install an application called Git Bash. And these apps are just ways of emulating for us the command line environment and letting us get into our computers through the command line. So this is itself a piece of software, and we'll use it to interact with our computers accordingly, okay? So we're in terminal. Of course, you could have just used, say, the search bar and gone that way. I use my terminal so much that I just have it down in my dock at the bottom of the screen. Yeah. Okay, but we're here, and I will assume then that we've had no trouble so far. If anything comes up, again, just let us know. And we'll get started from here. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust my font size a little bit so that it's a little bit easier for you all to see. Okay. How does that look? Are we decent with this if I type some text in? Good? Perfect. All right. So the first thing to note about this particular application, you'll see something similar if you're on Git Bash, is that it's a very mute application. One of the real difficulties of getting your head around the command line and getting used to it or comfortable with it is that it doesn't really talk to you very much. And it doesn't give you a whole lot of information at the start about where you are, what you're seeing, or what you can do in the way that our file system and our windowing system normally does, right? If I were to open my Finder again, you could see that available to me are all of the different applications or directories, that is my folders and my files that I could go to and click and open and do whatever work I need to do for the day. But the command line doesn't give us this information. When I open it, it gives us some very sort of terse information about when I last opened it a few minutes ago. And then it gives me a brief little sort of tag that shows me where I am. We'll talk a little bit about how I know where I am, and then opens out onto what's called a prompt. So on this line, there's a little bit of useful information, and we can track how it changes over the course of the workshop. I'll call attention to this a few times, but you can see here that I have my username for my computer. It's Tyler. You might have something different, and then my computer's name, right over here. So this particular portion probably looks different for all of you, but it's just telling you that you're the present user who is using the command line at the moment, right? Then we'll see a little mark here called a tilde. We'll talk a little bit more about this in a second. And then a percent sign for me. Sometimes this is a $sign. There are a couple other signs that mark what's just called the prompt. And all of this is sort of saying to you is that it's ready for instruction, right? I have this percent sign. It's just the kind of endpoint that says, all right, let's do something, right? So again, all we have are some login information, the user, the computer, this little symbol that I'll talk about in a moment, and then the prompt itself, and then maybe a blinking cursor or something like that, right? Anything else will have to use some sort of command to pull up information if we want to see it. So there are two sort of broad classes of commands that we use on the command line in order to see the information that our computer contains and then to manipulate that information in some fashion. So I just like to think of this as a difference between navigation commands and manipulation or execution commands. Those are sort of informal ways of bracketing, just kind of in a general sense, the two different types, I think, in general, of the type of commands that you will use on the command line with high frequency. So we'll start with navigation commands, and we'll just start with getting a decent sense of where we are right now, and then we'll move on to some manipulation commands in a little while. Okay, so we've got a blank screen, here we are, but I need to see more information with this if the command line is going to be useful. And to do that, we need to send it some sort of command. The first one that we're going to do, and that I would like you to sort of follow along and perform with me, is just a command called ls or list. So I just type ls into the command line right after the prompt, and I hit return or enter. And you can see suddenly that I get a little list of words, right? Desktop, downloads, movies, pictures, sites, documents, library, music, public, Zotero, right? Okay, great. Well, what is this? Where is this? If I were to open my Finder window, you can see right here, I have desktop, documents, downloads, movies, music, pictures, public, sites, and Zotero in my home folder, right? So this is the kind of graphical user interface with the windowing system, and it represents the exact same thing as typing ls into the command line, right? This is the same information that this particular way of looking at the computer represents to us, right? So ls is how you can see what is in the present folder that you've opened up to at any one point. You'll use this command constantly, ls, and then once more, there's a desktop, downloads, movies, etc. And likewise, we can see that here, right? Good so far? Excellent. Okay. So I say this in part just to once more reiterate the fact that we are using our computers in ways that are ultimately the same, even if they look a little bit different. So this is the kind of first step to saying, don't be scared of the command line. So here we are. I am at my home directory, and in there I see a list of other folders, actually. I am a little anal retentive about the command line. I think it also it's getting really cluttered right now. So I like to clear it periodically, and you're going to see me do that. That's just kind of a tick that I have on Mac. You can clear your screen with clear, right? So that's another brief way just to kind of, if things are getting cluttered, there you go. So I've got ls, but I could get more information if I wanted. If I go back to this home folder in this particular view, you can see here that I have additional information available to me so far. I've got date modified, so various modifications done to these folders. There's a size, and then there's a kind as well. We don't have that with just pure ls, but we can get that by adding to that command what's called a flag. So if we use ls, we can hit that command and then a space and then a hyphen. And this hyphen flags for your computer that you're going to be adding or modifying the base commands that you've just declared, in this case ls, with some sort of nuance or further information. So this flag L that I'm going to show you shows us a little bit something different when we use it in conjunction with ls. Here, we've printed out a whole lot more information. We've got this kind of strange string. We've got me, my user. We've got a particular group to which my user belongs. And then we have similar information that we were seeing with the windowing system. The last time that this particular file was modified, which file it is, and then you can't actually see it, but this is the size of that particular file on my computer, right? So that was just ls, and then we flag it with the hyphen and then L, right? So this is a really useful way of just getting a little bit more information about what's on my, my computer or where I am in any particular directory. All of the commands, or most of the commands on the command line, have these flags. There are a whole bunch of them, and we're not going to be able to really talk about the ways that you can sort of mash them together, combine them, or why it might be valuable to use one or another. But one sort of resource that you can look at in order to get a little bit better sense of what a command is doing is by going to its manual page on the command line. To get there, we use something called the manual command, which is just MAN. And then we type in the command that we want a little bit more information on. So if I wanted to see all of the different ways that I could use ls, I could type man, and then I could hit ls. And then I could get a little manual that's on this back side of the command line that contains all of the following options, right? So I can use the @ sign, I can use 1, I can use capital A, I can use lowercase a. And all of these are going to just give me a little bit different information than the base ls commands, right? So that was once more just man, which is itself a little command, and then ls. You get out of man this manual view by pressing Q, right? So just that. I won't spend too much time on manual, if only just to kind of flag it as a resource for you as you continue to learn a little bit more on your own about how you interact with a computer this way. So I'm going to clear my screen. The one flag that I do want to show briefly that is still part of the ls command is A. So that's ls-a. Here, we're getting a significantly more information that is sort of spat out than what we would get if we just pressed ls, right? On ls, we just have desktop, downloads, movies, etc. But on LSA, we're getting a whole list of all these kind of weird names and terms that are all appearing with a period in front of them. You can see that here. So your computer and probably your screen looks a little bit different than what mine has. Maybe you have more of these types of files and directories, or maybe you have less. What they are is they're called dot files, and usually they're just various kinds of configuration files that programs and applications or you yourself might have set up to make various things that you need to do on your computer a little bit easier in one form or another, right? So for example, these history files, there's a Python history, there's a ZSH history, or an R history. These are kind of like web browser histories. My computer is just tracking, your computer is too, some of the commands that I will use either on the command line or in other programs. And it just makes it a little bit easier to find out what I've done and to reference those commands if I want to repeat something, right? So for example, if I just press up on the arrow here, you can see that it pulls up automatically LSA, right? So that's just up and A. And that's because my computer has stored the most recent command that I sent to it on the command line in this little file here called ZSH history, right? So we could cycle all the way back through, to the very beginning of this workshop just with this up key pattern, or I can go back down, right? So again, think of this almost like browsing history on your web browser. Okay, so these dot files are normally things that you don't really want to mess with too much, but it's good to know that they're there. As you get a little bit more comfortable with the command line environment, you'll learn a little bit about where you might want to tweak them or change them. For example, I have made a modification to one of my files in this directory to get color output on my command line. And I just like to do that because it makes it a little bit easier to see the difference between a directory, which is in blue, and then a particular, like a file, which in my computer is green. So I use a little bit of color coding in this instance, and have kind of modified my base view a little bit just so that I can more intuitively grasp what it is that I'm seeing and kind of quickly say, okay, I want to go right here, or I want to open this object over here, and know that just kind of intuitively because of their coloring. So a dot file, which again is LSA, gives me that ability to make those kinds of changes. Right? Okay. So that's great. We know what directory, or we know the additional information that might be in a particular directory. In this case, I'm in my home directory, and this is all that's available to me. But there isn't a whole lot of stuff there that I could do much with. I think I saw Carl saying that I keep that directory pretty sparse, and indeed I do. So if we wanted to go elsewhere or pull up something else, we're kind of out of luck if we just stay here. To get into other portions of my computer, I'm going to have to work with a series of other commands. But before I do those particular commands, I want to show you where I'm at with regard to my computer as a whole. Right, so our computers have what's called a root, and that's the kind of starting points, and down from which all of the different files and directories kind of descend. So that root keeps a kind of steady and stable location for my computer as like an address. You can think of it like a street address, town hall or something like that. And then from that come all of the different directories and files that each have their own address and their own location, and can be accessed accordingly. But they can only be accessed because they're kept at the very top in line with this kind of single address called root. So to see where I am in my computer and to see where you are in your computers, we do something called the present working directory or print working directory command. And that's just going to show us a string that is where we are in relationship to root, where we are in relationship to the kind of anchor point that keeps our computer knowing where all of the different files and all of the different folders or directories are at any one point. So that's once more PWD, print or present working directory. And it's a pretty simple little command, but it gives us a sense of where we might be at any one point in when I'm on the command line. So here is the very start of root. Then there's a folder right above me called users. And then I'm in the present folder Tyler, which is my home directory, right? If I wanted to go to another directory or so another folder that is in the Tyler folder where we are right now, we're going to enter a command called cd. So let me show what's available to me right now. I've got desktop, documents, downloads, and so forth. And so say I wanted to go to desktop. Well, I need to send another navigation command to my computer that will march me down or up from that kind of whole string that is my file path. right? So desktop lives underneath Tyler. And so I need to get down to desktop from where I presently am, okay? That's kind of a weird garbled way of thinking about this for a moment, but it'll make sense in just a moment. Once I send in the following command, I'm gonna clear my screen. I'm gonna show you all that's in my folder. And then I'm just gonna hit CD, and then I would like to go to my desktop. So I'm gonna type in desktop. Nothing really has happened. Again, the command line is pretty mute. There's not a whole lot of information that it gives you. And so as a kind of rule of thumb, if something hasn't happened, you can kind of trust, or you haven't seen something happen, you can kind of assume that the operation was successful. Obviously, there are caveats to that, but we just sometimes have to act on faith that indeed my computer took me to where I wanted to go. So CD is just change directory. So I used that to get to my desktop. The one bit of information that did change is that you can see now over here, desktop has appeared next to my computer's name in the prompt right here, right? So that changed, and that lets me know what particular folder, or that is my directory, where I am at any one point, right? So desktop is where I am right now. If I were to print my working directory, you could see here then that at the very beginning was the root, then into users, then Tyler, which is where I just was, and then now desktop. So in the kind of overall address schema of my computer, desktop sits lower than my user home directory, Tyler, which is to say that the desktop is a subdirectory of Tyler. Right? That's how we would sort of call that in the language of computer addresses, right? So we're in desktop, but there's nothing on my desktop. You can see here, I just have a completely blank screen. I, again, keep it fairly sparse, because if I see things on my desktop, it usually means that they are something that I have that to do for that day, or that's incomplete, and it drives me insane until I actually do it. So I keep my desktop clear, or I try to keep it clear at all times. And so there's not a whole lot of information there. Even if I were to flag with LSA, there's really not a whole lot of information there as well. All there is this kind of R history, which is a little file, and then a dot dot and a single dot, right? So that's all that's available to me on my desktop. Here we are. So we would be stuck if we went down into my desktop from that kind of higher level of my user folder and found that there was nothing there and couldn't get out of it, right? There's nothing that further I can go to from my desktop. There are no other files to open, and there are no other folders to jump down into. So for the moment, it seems like I'm kind of stuck here, right? And that can be a sort of other point to flag, I think, is that it's easy to sort of feel like you've hit a dead end sometimes on the commands line. Because you can go to a directory and kind of corner yourself into a location where you kind of seem to have run out of options or something like that, right? But our computers give us a way to get out of even an empty directory. If I hit LSA one more time, you can see that sure, there was this R history file, but there are also these two little dots. These dots are really important for the overall structure of a computer. What they're doing is that they're symbolically marking two things. Well, each of them marks one thing. Dot is a way to represent, a way that your computer represents the present working directory, right? So just dots. So that doesn't really mean anything to you a whole lot right now, but it'll make a little bit more sense in just a second. Dot dot, on the other hand, says, represents the directory that is directly above the one I'm in right now, right? So in the overall scheme of where I'm at in my computer, dot dot is the same as Tyler, right? Because I'm at the desktop, and then the next folder that is above me in the kind of metaphor of the tree that we're speaking of right now is Tyler. So our computers keep these two little addresses nestled, hidden away in our each folder that we create on our computer. And that lets us hop around from location to location, either further down into our computer or further up into the directories that sit above it. Right? So dot is just saying I'm here. This is the particular directory where I'm at. Dot is the same as desktop. And then dot dot would be the same as Tyler. So what that means is that I can use that dot dot to get out of my desktop. And I just use cd or change directory to do this. Cd dot dot and enter. And you can see then that this has changed back to the little tilde, right? And if I hit ls, then you can see, well, now I'm back to where I started this whole workshop with desktops, downloads, documents, and so forth. Okay. So I'm going to show this one more time. I'm going to get down into my desktop where there's nothing available to me, but there is a way out. cd dot dot, which is the same as saying, go back to Tyler. Now, we didn't actually see the word Tyler appear in the prompt over here. Instead, we're just getting this little tilde. The tilde is another symbolic representation on your computer that just means home. So home is the tilde, and it's a shorthand method of just saying, well, I can return at any point to my home directory or know where my home directory is by just marking that with the tilde, right? So I could have done, I could have gone down into my desktop, and then I could have just hit CD and then tilde, and that would have also brought me back up to where I am presently in my home folder. This tilde little sign, using it in conjunction with change directory with CD, is a sort of shorthand way of bringing you back wherever you are on your computer to your home directory. So if at any point you get lost in the kind of subfolders or wherever that you are in your computer, you can always hit CD tilde, which is change directory to home, and you'll get back home. And then you can kind of start piecing your way through to kind of find where it is that you lost the trail and get back to the folder or the file that you need, right? So this tilde you're going to see all of the time when you're both working on the command line, and then if you're interested in get into other forms of writing code, you'll see this often. There's another special symbol that's on the command line, and that's this backslash here, or / actually, and that equals root. Right? And that root, remember, is what I was talking about earlier. It's the kind of single anchoring point for all of the other address locations on my computer. So if I were to type out print working directory one more time, you can see that it actually begins with this slash. And that slash represents, there's no other, it says there's no farther up I can go. This is the root of my computer. Everything has to come down from here, right? So likewise, I can use this slash in shorthand. I can hit CD and then slash, and then you can see here then that I am now in my root. And if I were to print working directory, there'd be nowhere else for me to go. It would just be this slash here, right? So these two symbols, you've got tilde for home and then slash for root, are good shorthand ways of finding your way around your computer at any one point. Okay? Everyone good so far? Great. All right. So we're going to be moving toward file manipulation in just a moment here, but there's one quick thing that I need to add to this concept of the root, and that is that there are two ways of sort of writing paths when you want to change directory, that is CD on your command line. There is what's called an absolute path, and then there's a relative path. The differences between these two can be a little bit difficult to sort of get in your brain at first. I find that it was one of the things that when I was still learning what the command line was and how to use it, that I found to be most confusing. So I'll describe it here. We'll talk a little bit more about it, but I think it's one that you'll just kind of get used to as you've actually started to move around in your computer. The absolute path is the equivalent of typing pwd, right? So the absolute path is the kind of canonical sort of base, never unchanging, immutable string that represents at any one moment where you are in your computer or where you might like to go. Right? So I'm at root right now. If I were to use an absolute path to get back to my desktop, I could type it out in the full by saying this, cd dash, and then remember we were in users, and then we were in Tyler, and then we wanted to go to desktop. So if I entered this in, this would bring me directly down to my desktop, and this would let me skip actually a whole number of little mini operations that I would need to otherwise enter to get down to desktop, right? So I could have done cd root, and then I could have said, okay, well, what's in root? There's a number of things. Well, I could cd to users, but then here I am with Tyler. I need to cd to Tyler. And then, okay, where can I go from here? I can go down to desktop, right? That was a lot of typing to get down to my desktop. If I use an absolute path, I can declare it in all one go and not have to do all of those extra steps. So I'm going to start back up at the root, clear it. And instead of going down into users over here, I'm just going to type cd users, Tyler, and then desktop. Right? So this is an absolute path to my desktop. And there I am. You can see that it changed over here, right? So one of the real things that's powerful about the command line is that I can get to any point on my computer, any location on my computer from any other location with a single string. If I know where in my computer a particular file lives, I can open that without having to do any clicking, without having to move through any windows, go up or down or wherever. I can just enter it directly into the command line and open that file or go to that directory immediately. So when you start to get used to working in this environment, you'll actually find that it can be significantly faster to work around your computer and to navigate it than it would be to go into my like your applications folder or something like that, right? In order to move around there, I have to do all sorts of clicking, right? There's my documents, and then maybe I want to go down into GitHub, and then I want to go into a folder there or something like that, right? There's a whole lot of clicking that I need to do to get down to a particular folder, whereas with the command line, I could just write it out, right? I could just give its absolute path and get there instantly. So that's one of the real advantages to this type of system. And that is then the absolute path. We use this accordingly. The relative path is a version of the same kind of principle, but it's truncated. It's not the full kind of string that you would need to write out. Rather, it's one that changes depending on where you're at in any particular location on your computer, right? So what I just mean by that is, let's go back to home. In order to get down to my desktop, I didn't actually need to write the whole path here, users, Tyler, and desktop, which I could have done. All I had to do is write desktop and get down there, right? And that's because desktop was just immediately available to me when I was in my home directory. So when I do cd desktop, what I've actually done is I've made a little relative path that's a version of this longer one up here, but that I just don't have to type out all the way, right? I can get there instantly. The kind of difficulty with this is that it's always going to change, right? So if I'm at my home directory and I want to go to documents, well, there is no desktop link from documents, right? We have EBA, we have a couple other folders over here, but I can't get to my desktop from this particular folder. I could, once more, use cd users Tyler and then desktop to get there, but that's kind of a lot. Alternatively, I could write a relative path, and we'll walk through this a little bit slowly, but it's just a way to kind of get yourself into the mindset of why location changes and why it matters to know location where you are on your when you're using the command line. So I'm in documents here, and we've got a number of different folders, and then likewise we have, if we sort of unveil the hidden folders, a couple other little things around, right? But we also have this ... right here. And remember that that ... brings me to whatever directory is directly above the present one I'm in. In the case of documents, that would be Tyler, right? So cd ... would bring me back to Tyler, and then desktop is there and I could go in accordingly. Okay, that saves us a little bit of time. But there's one other option that I could do, which would be to use a relative path. So I'm going to just show us once more. I'm going to get down into my documents. Here we are. Here's the additional information. And since I know that this ... brings me up to Tyler, and since I know that in Tyler, I can get down to my desktop, I can use this ... in a relative way to get to my desktop. So what I mean by that is I can say cd space ... slash, remember this ... right here means Tyler, and then I can hit desktop. And that brings me to my desktop. So what I've done here is I've basically used the symbolic notation of the two dots as a kind of placeholder for that home directory. And that depended on where I was, right? It's because my documents were underneath my home directory folder. And I used that as a kind of little anchoring point in a relative sense to then launch me over into the desktop. Right? So you can start doing this in a number of different ways to get all over and around your computer accordingly. Right? So again, this is sort of what you would get acclimated to, and as you use this a little bit more, you'll get a little bit better sense of where to use, say, a relative versus an absolute path, and you'll get quite fast, I think, if you use this particular representation enough, and quite sort of agile in navigating around and finding your way through your computer.
Tyler, can you quickly address the issue of spaces and special characters and names?
I don't know if
that was in your plan, but it's coming up in chat more than once.
Yeah. So wonderful. I'm glad people are having that problem. I was about to discuss it before I move on. This is the last little bit of information that we need to give about these navigation commands. So spaces are your enemy on the command line. The reason that spaces are your enemy is that the command line's syntax uses space as a way to piece out all of the different elements of a particular command, right? So if I'm at my home directory, if I want to go to my home directory, for example, cd and then space and then tilde is what I would type in. But what this space is doing right here is that it's telling my computer, here's the command, and then separate, and then here's the particular little bit of information that is going to get coupled with this command in order to complete it properly, right? So I have to use cd space wherever I want to go in order to get to wherever I want to go. So when we have spaces in our file system or in our folders or in our file names, that is really difficult for our computers to parse on the command line because it thinks that you are using that space in a syntactic way to send commands rather than declaring a file name or a file path or directory path that has space in it. You see the kind of difference there? So I could show you the differences between using a sort of path that has a space in it versus one that doesn't. But my computer has no spaces in any of the file names or in any of the directories or anything like that. And that's because I use my command line so much that I don't want to ever deal with the ambiguity of what happens when there's a space in the file name and I'm trying to open it on the command line. So you're not totally sort of out of luck if you do have spaces in your files or in your folders. But if you start using the command line in a really serious way, you'll soon quickly learn that those end up really bogging you down, these spaces. So for demonstration purposes, I'll give you a little hint. Carl might have put this into the chat, but what you have to do is you have to escape your space. So imagine, for example, that I have a folder let's actually just make one really quick here. Well, no, I think we'll stick with just kind of showing in the abstract. Here I am, and I want to get to some sort of directory that's maybe called new space directory, and I want to get there. And if I were to say cd new space directory, that wouldn't work, right? But what I could do is escape the space, which is basically tell my computer to ignore it in the kind of command line syntax and rather read it as part of the file or the file name. So cd space, and then I could give my information. And what I would do is I would make a little backslash right there. And then that would give me, or that would tell my computer to read that space as part of new directory as a whole name, rather than as cd new and then some other command or something like that that I would like to use on the command line, right? So spaces are your enemy on the command line, or they can be. I would encourage you, if you decide to kind of go this route of using your computer a little bit more, to not use them. There are also just kind of generally in kind of data upkeep, a number of other reasons why we try to avoid spaces, because they produce various kinds of ambiguities and address locations in the ways that we import data and all of that. That's for another workshop, but there is, of course, a way to use the space in a way that actually accesses the directory or the file name on your command line. So I'm glad that question came up. I'm glad the problem came up. There are solutions to it. This escape character, by the way, lets you work with a number of different kind of weird characters that you might encounter either in programming environments, but also on your command line. We can't go into that today too much, but this escape key is your friends when you find that you can't open a file or something on the command line. Okay. So with that, we have kind of closed out of these navigation commands, and we're going to talk a little bit then about manipulation commands, this kind of other class of commands. So I'm on my home directory, and I have another few directories available to me. But say I want to make a new folder and do something with it. I nearly did that a minute ago, but I decided against it because we've got stuff to do with it right now. So to do that, I can, in fact, use the command line and use a particular command called make directory, which in the shorthand for command line is mkdir, right? So right now, there's just this base set of folders in my home directory. But say I wanted to make a new one called my first directory. What I would do is I would say mkdir, make directory, space, and then I am going to type in my first directory. And you can see here that I'm not using spaces. I'm going to use these underscores as a way to make it a little more human readable for me, but also as a way to avoid having to deal with those escape characters that I was just talking about. So if I press enter here, nothing happens. We once more get the kind of mute blank that is the command line interface. But if I hit ls, you can see over here, and you'll see on your own screen, my first directory is now available as a folder on my computer, right? And if I can go into my windowing system over here, you can see that my first directory is also open right here, right? It exists in either way. I've just, instead of going to file and then new folder, which would be how I would do this in the windowing system, I've used make directory instead to create a new folder that I can put something in. Right? So that's mkdir, and then we'll just say the name of the folder or the directory from there. We can do something similar with particular files. So say we wanted to make a little text file, and what we're going to do is we're going to make that file, and then we're going to put it into the directory that we just made. Right? So a similar kind of principle is at work in making different files. I am going to use a command called echo to make a little file, but there are a number of ways to do it. So I'll just flag that that's for further exploration on your part. I've got here my home folder, and I want to do my first directory. What I'd like to type in, and what I'd like you all to type in as well, is echo, which is a little command, and then hello world, right? So if I just do echo hello world, all this does is print it back out to screen on the command line, right? So echo hello world, echo my name is Tyler, just prints out to screen, right? Nothing particularly exciting, but we can send that little output to a file and then start doing something with it. So we do that by saying echo and then hello world. And then we use this little caret character over here, which is to send whatever the output of a command is on the command line to something else. And then we're going to just send it to a new little file that we're calling hello world.txt. So I don't have a file on my computer right now called hello world.txt, but my computer is going to automatically make it for me when I enter this command. So I can do that. Again, I don't get much in the way of other information, but if I ls, you can see now hello world.txt exists on my computer. And likewise, just for the sake of sort of clearly demonstrating where this stuff is, I can see that file right here. Great. So you'll notice that I had to actually include the .txt extension. This is one little thing that is particular to the command line. You do need to specify what kind of file you're creating when you do so. Whereas if you're using something like Microsoft Word or Excel or something like that, the software just knows what file type it wants to create, or it gives you a list of options that you would maybe use with a drop-down menu or something like that. But with the command line, you actually need to type this out in full. But I could go in and I could open this and see, in fact, here we are, and there's little hello world. It might be a little hard to see, but there you go. It's right there. Okay. Okay, we good on that? I think so. No sort of crises in chat, it seems like, for the moment. Except for the most recent question, which is delightful. It's the next thing we're going to do. We're going to move that hello world text around a little bit. So we've got it here in my home folder or in your home folder. But what I'd like to do is move it into that directory that I just created. So what we're going to do is we're going to move hello world.txt into my first directory. Okay? We do that with a command called, sensibly enough, move, which is shorthand MV on the command line. So move has a particular syntax to it. which is to say it needs a certain order of information that you're going to give to it. And that is its move, the file that you want to move. You could also move a folder, and then the location where you want to move it to, right? So that is move space, the file that I'm going to move or the folder that I'm going to move, space, and then location. In this case, what we want to do then is say mv hello world.txt space, and then I'd like to move it into my first directory. So that's mv hello world.txt my first directory. If I do that, nothing happens. But if I hit ls, you can see now that hello world is gone, right? If I were to change directories and go into my first directory, hit ls there it is. So mv or move just moved that file around behind the scenes in this kind of quiet way to my first directory, and there it will sit and I can do whatever I want with it. So yes, indeed, you could move it to your desktop, was the question in the chat. You can move it wherever you wanted to. The nice thing about move is that you can use a relative or an absolute path to move it wherever you want. So I could move it all the way up to my root if I wanted to, or I could say move it down to my documents folder if I wanted to, or something like that, right? So you can use an absolute path in conjunction with MV to move something all the way over onto, like, you know, the very farthest point away from your computer or on your computer from where you are right now, and that'll work, right? It's great. Likewise, I can copy that file, and we'll do that too. And the syntax is very similar. Copy is CP, and that's copy. And then what it likewise does is it uses the name of the file that you want to copy, in which case, hello world. But in the difference being that instead of the location where you want to move something to, you give the name of the new file, right? So we need to name this hello world.txt something else. Otherwise, bad things will happen. Either the most likely what will happen is nothing. At worst, you might overwrite a file, which probably isn't that big of a deal if it's just the same thing. But again, we want to be very specific here and actually write out the name. So I'll just do this by saying cp hello world new underscore hello world .txt. And there, again, you need to be very explicit about the text file. There, nothing happens. But if I hit ls, you can see now that I have two files rather than one in my little directory here. All right, so it just made a copy. They're the exact same file, and that's all there is. Okay, last little manipulation command, and then we will get into text editing. Say I want to remove a folder or a file from my computer with the command line. This is the only command that has a little bit of a threat to it, or a little bit, there are more stakes to this command than there are to other commands. And that is because on your computer, when you remove something with the command line, it doesn't move it directly to, say, your recycling bin or your trash. It just immediately gets rid of it. So you need to be really sure that you want to get rid of your file. And you need to be really careful about what file you specify as the one that you want to get rid of, because if you don't specify carefully enough, or you type in the wrong file name, you can remove some important information that you might want. You're probably not going to mess up the entire structure of your computer with this particular commands, because computers are built in such a way that they're that sense that kind of base or core functionality is protected from everyday use. But say, you know, you had a paper that you were working on, or some sort of document, and you accidentally removed it, chances are it's going to be gone. So we just need to be careful about what we specify as something that can be removed. So the remove command or delete is just rm. And then it's quite simple. It's just the file that we want to delete. In this case, let's get rid of the original, helloworld.txt. So I usually kind of double check. There are some flags that you can use that even put more kind of, I don't know, warnings we could say, or, training wheels around remove that you can look at if you look at the manual entry, but here that's kind of a low stakes thing. So remove and then hello world.txt, nothing happened, but if I hit ls once more, you can see that new hello world is now the only thing that sits in this folder. Great. Okay, so that is navigating the command line, and that is the basics of manipulating files on the command line. The next thing that we're going to do, and this will be a shorter little section, is work with files and their contents with what's called a text editor that lives on your command line. So we have documents like Mac Pages or Microsoft Word that allow us to interface with text and manipulate it or create it in ways that I think we're probably all pretty familiar with. One of the things that I was sort of astonished by when I was first learning about the command line was that there's actually a whole number of little applications and text editors specifically that live just under the surface of your windowing system that you can use to access and edit and manipulate or delete text without having to use Microsoft Word or Pages or Google Docs or something like that, right? And these little editors are pretty useful if you need to make a little quick change to something, or if you need to create a kind of sparse, spare, simple file that you would maybe share with someone or put some data into or something like that, and didn't want that cluttered by all of the extra information that something like maybe Microsoft Word adds. The problem with something like Microsoft Word, or Pages for that matter, is that there's actually a huge amount of information that those applications include in your Word doc or your Pages doc beyond just the simple text that you are actually writing. So that's formatting information, for example, additional metadata about where the file was created, where it's coming from, all of that kind of stuff. But sometimes we want just a really simple little text file. Later workshops would discuss why this particular form of data is important, especially for data science. But for the moment, you just need to know how to interact with this textual data specifically using command line text editors. So the command line text editor, that's the one that I use most frequently, that's my favorite, that ships on Macs, that comes with Git Bash, is called Vim. And you can open Vim by just typing this into your terminal, and that'll open a kind of home page that sort of just looks like this. Please don't do this for the moment because it's a little difficult to get out, as you'll see in a moment. But here's a kind of home page information. Okay, wonderful. But what I can also do is use this little Vim command in conjunction with the file that I want to open. So what I'd like you all to do is open this new hello world.txt with Vim. So what we're going to do, I'll just clear off my screen, is say Vim and then space, and then the way to open this particular file in Vim is to say Vim space new hello world.txt, right? If I press enter, you can see that the entire file system has changed, or the file view has changed. Suddenly we're in the text file. And we see a little bit of information, but there's not a lot. We didn't write a lot to this text file, and Vim is very spare. It doesn't have a lot of information available to us. So here we are, and what I'd like us to do is to add a little bit of text strings accordingly, or into this file rather. The difficulty with Vim is that it operates through what are called modes. They're just a sort of series of ways of interfacing with your text data. And you have to know what those are in order to enter or exit the editing modes, and then also to enter or exit the program itself. you can see here, for example, that there's no sort of indication of how I might exit Vim, right? And even worse, if I were to just type some stuff, there's actually, for the most part, no real way to enter information from the particular view I'm in. That's because I'm in something called command mode, which is a kind of overview representation or sort of view rather of this file. But if I wanted to actually make some changes to this document, I need to enter another mode, and that's called insert mode. So I do that by just simply pressing I. I sort of mashed around a little bit. So I'm gonna, when I was showing that demonstration of not being able to type, so I'm gonna exit out of this really quickly and then get back in and hit I, and you can see down here over on the corner that this little message has shown up that's called insert, and that lets me know that I can actually go in and enter some text. So if you hit I and see that little insert, then you know that you are able to go in and say, hello world, my name is Tyler. Right? Can go down, add some spaces. How are you today? What was the weather like? Etc. Right? So in this sense, it's actually quite simple. It's a text editor and relatively intuitive, I think. You know, you can't use your mouse within this space. That's one of the difficulties of Vim. You need to navigate it with usually with your arrow keys. There are a couple other ways that we'll talk about in just a second, maybe. But otherwise, this is a very straightforward text editor, right? But there's still not necessarily a way to get out of it. So I'm going to show you that in just a moment. I'm just checking. Okay, yep. Thanks, Pamela, for showing the exit protocol. It is a little bit difficult. We'll actually go through that ourselves. We're in insert mode right here, but we need to get to that command mode that we entered Vim on in order to actually begin the exit procedure, I guess you could call it. It's sort of a weird little roundabout way of exiting this program. We're in insert mode, which we accessed with I. To get into the normal mode or the command mode, we just hit the escape key. And you can see when I did that, the insert message went away. So I'm going to show you that one more time. I'm in insert mode. I pressed I, and then I just pressed escape. And now suddenly I'm back into that view where I couldn't actually enter information first off, right? So that's once more I, and then escape. So Vim, when in doubt, I think press escape because the normal mode, this kind of commands level editing mode that Vim begins with is always going to be available to you when by pressing escape. So if you can't remember where you are or you can't remember whether or not you can access text or something like that, or edit text in Vim, just hit escape a bunch of times and make sure that you're on the normal mode that begins the, that you sort of begin on. And from there, then you can find your way around once more. So Vim is a little bit finicky and there's a little bit of a learning curve sometimes, I think, but it is quite useful to know how to use it, okay? So one last time, insert mode, you can see that here, and then escape is going to bring me to normal mode. So now we need to exit Vim, and that, as I said, has a bit of a procedure behind it. If we wanted to save the changes that we just made to this text file, we need to send the program Vim a little command. And we do that by starting in normal mode. So by making sure that we're in that kind of initial starting place with escape, and then typing in colon. And you'll see here that then that made a little colon appear down at the bottom, and then W. And that W for Vim is a little command that means write or save. So if I hit :W and then return, you can see here then that new hello world appeared at the bottom of the screen, alongside a little bit more information that's not particularly useful for us today, but could be. There are 6 lines in this file. There are 80 characters in this file as well. And then it's just confirming that this file was now written with that additional information to my computer hard drive. Right? So I'll show that one more time. We are in normal mode. I pressed exit or escape, though it wasn't technically necessary. And I'm just going to hit commands and then W. Right? Great. We've saved our file. Let's get out of Vim and then get back into it, actually. So what we're going to do is send another command, which is how we quit. And that is : and then Q. Right? So I think Pamela mentioned this in the chat. Quitting Vim is just one of the most asked questions for early programmers and on Stack Overflow and whatnot. I think I was trapped in Vim once for like 10 minutes when I started using the command line. I just didn't know where I was. I also wasn't on my own computer, so I didn't want to mess anything up, but I could not get out of it. And so I eventually had to Google it and felt kind of silly for doing so. But all you need to do is hit :Q and then enter, and you'll actually be taken completely out of it. And then suddenly here we are back in the command line and back in the view that we saw when we were looking at that my first directory, right? So here we can see there's new hello world, and we can either go back in and make some further edits, or we can move on with whatever else we need to do for the day, right? So I'm just going to enter Vim one more time just to kind of prove, although it hardly needs doing, that the changes that we made are there. And if I wanted to exit, again, that's : and Q. So I'll just kind of stand back briefly and say that one of the really useful things about knowing how to interact with text data and other forms of data on the command line with something like Vim is that a lot of data science work gets done remotely. It gets done on servers. It gets done on other people's computers. It's also sort of reliance on shared data that you might need to make a little tweak to or an edit to, and then send off to someone else, or to keep or make an edit in some sort of shared space where other people can then access it. And sometimes those storage places for these files, say if it's on an external server, don't even have screens that you can go and use a sort of mouse and keyboard with to make some sort of change to a file, right? We're all remote right now, mostly at least. And if I want to access the data that I have stored in at Davis, I need to use the command line in order to get to those files. And if I want to make changes to those files, I need to know how to use something like Vim in order to manipulate that data, make some little tweaks here and there, run the code that I need to run, and then get out of it for the day, right? So there's a really sort of practical dimension to knowing how to do all of this, because the kind of network infrastructure that data science is built on and that it uses, and that not just data science, a huge amount of cloud computing environments, the internet itself, right, is all built on most often using these kinds of representations of data and of file systems and file structures and file views over what we are normally used to in the form of, say, Microsoft Word or, Big Sur or a Windows 10 or something like that, right? So it can be very empowering, I think, to know how to use these tools, because they are really the big support for so much of our computational technology and our computational media. And knowing how to use them, getting into them, and starting to manipulate things gives you a much better sense, or eventually will, of how this world of computing and this world of data science is put together, and how then you might be able to make some sort of intervention into that world with the kind of skills under your belt that something like this would give you, something like using the command line. So that's the kind of sales pitch, I think, for in part using some of this. That's something that both really matters for the kind of day-to-day work of something like doing data science, but it also matters, I think, very deeply for what these technologies are doing and how we use them and why it matters to know them in some sort of more thorough way, right? Most of all of this information is occluded from us on a day-to-day basis when we're using all of this, when we're using network technology, when we're using computers. But here it is, it's available to us and we can manipulate it and put it to whatever ends that we see fit, do good work with it potentially. So that's again, the pitch, all that sort of based, on this kind of like little 6 lines of text that I just wrote, but it is there. And from hopefully this, you can kind of see where you might get to kind of build out further skills and further familiarize yourself with, say, how Vim works or how the command line works. The one thing I'll end with just really briefly is a kind of glimpse of where you might go further with something like Vim is just to note that the course reader gives out a link to both a cheat sheet and then a wiki of further things that you could do with this particular program. Vim is highly extensible. Vim is highly modifiable. It's an incredibly complex program. I've shown you 4 commands maybe. There are hundreds and thousands of them that you can do and that you can modify and make your own if you so please. But one of the kind of neat things that you can do just to begin sort of exploring how you might familiarize yourself with Vim a little bit more is just to note that you can chain commands. So really briefly, remember, in order to save and then quit this particular file, we did :w and then :q. And then that brought us back out to the command line where we started. But the nice thing about Vim is that you can actually chain these commands or create what Vim calls chords. And so that we could just say WQ, and then that sends both write and quit at the same time. And then that brings us out. So I'm just gonna open that one more time, Q, or rather colon, and then WQ, and then go from there, send it in, right? So there are dozens of such commands that you can chain together with Vim. And in fact, indeed, like I said, you can sort of create your own sequences that will let you manipulate your computer or cause some sort of functionality to happen or run software or something like that from inside Vim. And it can be incredibly powerful that way. Although, again, we won't really discuss all of that right now because frankly, it is so complex that we could use 2 hours actually, I think, on talking about just this text editor. In fact, it might be a kind of interesting workshop to talk about. So, okay. So we are right on time. It's a quarter or half past, actually, half past. And what I'd like to end with is both some Q&A, but then also a little exercise. What we're gonna do is hang around here and you can all complete this exercise if you like. If you need to get going and have other things for the day, then you can take it with you and do whatever you'd like or ignore it altogether. I just kind of made it up as a sort of almost little puzzle that you can use and interact with as just a way to familiarize yourself with the command line a little bit further, practice using Vim a little bit, and just, again, getting familiarized with the space and the kind of representation that it affords or enables for using your computer. So that particular file lives, where is it? It's online. It's here at the second link, and I'm just gonna open this up and then I'll copy it over into the chat if it's not there already. Okay, I've sent that over. Also, just as a really brief note, please be sure to fill out the survey that Pamela has passed around. It's really useful for us to get some feedback on these workshops so that we can know how better to manage them or put them together, what works, what doesn't. If you liked it, wonderful. and so forth. So that's there, but I have just pasted in the location on the web for this little zip file that I'd like you all to download. And you can do that by just going over to the download button that's on GitHub here. And if you hit download, you should get prompted with a little message to save the file. And that'll enter into your downloads folder, okay? So I am going to just walk through really briefly where to put this folder, and so that you can actually complete the little puzzle that it contains. I just have it over here in my downloads, and it's perfectly fine to just unzip it from here. So I'm gonna unzip this folder, and all I did was click on it right from my computer, and you can see now it opened up a little file window, and it's just a folder called command line practice. If I go in, this is in my downloads folder. So what I can do is I can go CD, home, and then my downloads is in my home folder, downloads. Right, I can see that little file or that folder over here. I can go to it, and then you'll see that there are some instructions in there. If you'd like, you can follow along in the sort of command line here. So I'd encourage you to find your way to the downloads folder. That's probably by saying CD home, so tilde, and then downloads. And then you'll have that unzipped folder available to you. And what you can do then is move command line practice to your home directory, which is where I'd like you to put it so that you can do this little exercise. So we can move that command line practice up to home. That's what the file will look like. And you can see here then it disappeared. If I CD and then go back to home, now it's over in command line practice, which is in my home directory over here, right? So once more, that was, if I was down in my downloads folder, that'd be mv move space command line practice. And then back to home, I use that little shorthand. I could have also used ... And then for good measure, I just did the backslash or forward slash here, just to be very clear about where I wanted that to go. So there, and then I would just hit enter from there. Okay, so there it is. You are free to open that command line practice folder from home. And you'll see in there, you could use, if you wanted Vim to open the instructions and read accordingly, or you can also just go ahead and get to your home folder, go to command line practice, and I've included a little PDF as well, so that might be a little bit easier for you to follow along, especially as it's going to be asking you to do some commands on the command line and manipulate some files. So there's a little PDF in this folder that you're completely free to look at if you don't want to use the markdown file, which is also in there. So as I said, we're going to hang around for a little bit. I am going to stop sharing, and we'll take some questions if there are any. If there aren't, but you want to play around with this little directory structure, feel free to do so. And if questions come up as you're practicing a little bit, we can help answer those. But otherwise, that should do it for me for now. I'm going to stop sharing, and we'll also stop recording when Q&A seems to kind of peter out, and we'll hang around for another 25 minutes or so and then close out. So thank you, everyone. And I'm happy to take questions if they come up. So I see, yeah, thanks, Carl. Nancy just asked if you can use the rm command to remove a folder. In fact, you can, you just need a special little flag, and that's, Carl posted that over into the chat, that's rm-r, and there you are. So, and then he's given a little bit of information, but yep, you can absolutely remove a folder with rm. Great. I think I'll probably just stop recording and we can call that good. But again, we can answer questions if need be. I just don't see there's a need for recording any further. I think we can be good on that.